Spring water forms that what I call star fern hexagon. Rainwater forms a fanning pattern with a curve. Tap water tends to be very, very disordered. You can actually use my freezing method to freeze urine as well. It shows you the difference between someone who is highly stressed and then that same person 1 hour after they've done meditation, their urine looks completely different. I don't recommend drinking municipal tap water, at least gone through a filter. If you have to buy water, then I would buy a spring water. Put your hand in the water and take it out. And then he tested for chlorine. It wasn't there. There was none in it. My body had absorbed it all. Get yourself like a blue glass bottle. When light shines through the blue glass, and it's the only time I would ever recommend putting water in the sunshine, you make something called blue solar water with it. Even a simple thank you is going to make a difference as to the way the water is received. The power is with you. The moment we start thinking, what can I do for this water, rather than what can it do for me? Hello.
Hello, Veda. Whereabouts are you based?
In New Zealand.
Oh, very cool. Uh,
Yeah.
is it cold there at the moment?
This morning we actually had ice all over the car and on the rail outside. So it was quite the novelty. So I was filming the ice, of course. And I was thinking if I lived somewhere colder, I would never be inside. I'd be constantly taking pictures.
Yeah. If you lived in like a place where it snowed majority of the year, like Alaska, and you're surrounded by water, surrounded by snow, ice, yeah, you'd be in your sort of habitat, wouldn't you?
I guess I'm a chameleon in that way, in that for quite a while I was living in the States in the desert. And I managed to really, really enjoy that as well, just how life manages to grow with so little water. So, but it's a novelty because in the North Island of New Zealand, we don't get a lot of really, really freezing weather. So we do have the mountains and stuff like that, so you can go to it. But a, a, a person that I taught my method to, who lives in Utah, does all of the freezing outside. So he films as the crystallography forms and uses my technique. So he's been able to help us prove that it's not the freezer that are making the patterns, that these different patterns form outside as well. So that's been really helpful.
Veda, how did you get into this whole space of freezing water, creating ice, taking photos? Like, how did you get into this whole space?
Well, there's a long version and a short version. And the short version is that I had had a healing experience with a spring water here in New Zealand. And it made me ask the question, what makes this water different from other waters? So I looked at the analysis. It had a really high natural pH. So pH out of the ground is seasonally changed, but was sitting at around about a 9.9 to 9.7 in between those two. And I was thinking, well, what was it that made me heal so well, and what purged the glass out of me? So I'm going into the long version now, but I was in a horrendous car accident about 25 odd years ago. And we went under a 7-ton truck, rolled twice, and the driver died immediately. I was a passenger, and I had 8 surgeries over the course of 20 years. And on my last surgery, the doctors were standing around me in the hospital and were saying, you didn't recover well. I went in for bowel surgery, and they said, you have showers of blood clots in your lungs, and you're going to have to be on warfarin for possibly the rest of your life, which is a blood thinner. And I was young and outside of the car accident injuries, really healthy and well. And already I had the luxury of knowing that my body could heal itself, and that just because someone told me something would happen doesn't mean it necessarily would. So 3 doctors had already told me that I would probably never be able to have children based on the scarring from the seatbelt injury. And so I'd already had by that time 3 children for every doctor that told me I couldn't. So this time they were saying, you might have to be on warfarin for the rest of your life. So they said I would die if I didn't take it. So I did for several months. When I had a chest x-ray that was clear, I made a decision for myself to essentially not just take warfarin anymore. That was my own personal decision. It's certainly not any medical advice, but I already knew that my body was able to heal from things and do things that were able to basically do what other people told me it couldn't do. And so I ended up speaking to a friend of mine who was a medical doctor but practiced Ayurvedic medicine as well. And he told me that off the record, if I could find a source of naturally, emphasis on natural, I'm not talking about ionized water, naturally high pH water, it might help to stabilize my body in some way. And so I thought, well, that sounds easy, drinking water. So a lot of the water here in New Zealand is naturally alkaline. Most spring waters are naturally alkaline. They pick up the different minerals along the journey, which make it naturally alkaline. And this particular one I'm talking about, after putting myself on 2-week trials on varied waters and feeling hydrated, I eventually was introduced to this water by a client, because by this time I had a wellness center, and they said, there's this old guy. He's got a private source of really high naturally alkaline water, and he's only giving it to cancer patients. And perhaps, you want to try. And so I thought, well, yeah, absolutely. So I saw him, and he gave me a month's worth of water to try. And within 3 days, I noticed a change in something so many people don't want to talk about, which is like bowel motions. And so it seems that it is rampant how many people are constipated around the world based on the fact that they're not drinking enough quality water or any water. Some people don't drink water, which was shocking for me to learn. And they're like sitting on the toilet for an hour trying to push out a pebble. And so after having so much bowel surgery, I'm like, okay, things are looking good. But on day 10, I noticed all these bumps coming up along my arm and jaw that were particularly painful. And I knew my body was purging, but I didn't exactly know what. And although it sounds disgusting, there was this one really big angry area on my arm. And when I rubbed my hand along it, it felt sharp. I said, I think there's something in there. So I got some tweezers. I ended up pulling out this little shard of green glass. And between day 10 and 12, I'd picked out 27 pieces of green glass from my right side. And that had been in my body for over 20 years, because the man who died owned a nightclub, and in the back of his car, were crates of Steinlager beer, which is a lager in a green glass bottle. And when the car rolled, my right side got more green glass and the left side got more windscreen. And so that then led me on to wonder, what makes this water different than other waters? And then I started trialing people in my wellness center on it. And we did 8-week trials for them. And everybody from very, very, very healthy, fit athletes, all the way through to the very sick people, noticed an improvement in energy. One man had stage 4 cancer. He did a 27-day water fast using it. And 3 weeks after, found out he'd had spontaneous healing. But halfway through, they'd actually been able to see his tumor had reduced. So they were able to take it back to he was able to take it back to the fact that he was doing a fast. The hospitals were very kind of reluctant to say that was the case. And, everybody's eyesight improved. And that really interested me, because our eye lens is 99% highly ordered fourth phase water.
And this water that you're sort of giving to all your patients, what is this water? Yeah.
So it is a natural artesian water that comes from a very, very deep aquifer. So I think it's like 200 meters down. It's very, very deep. Maybe two. Yeah, I think it's very deep. It might be, I think it's around about that anyway. It might be feet. I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember. But either way, the point is that it's a very, very deep aquifer. At the bottom of it is actually a lot of quartz, which I think has some healing properties, or at least restructuring properties of water. And the pH out of the ground is incredibly high naturally, and that's because of the amount of bicarb and lime in the water. And so that it's very natural. What's interesting is how stable it is. So the people had been storing that water in a dark place, which is important for any natural spring water or artesian water, for around about 7 years. And the pH only dropped by 1. And they have all the notes and all of the analytics to show that. So they had it tested every year, and it was just incredibly stable. So that says quite a lot about the water. So there was just something special about it. And it tasted sort of slightly sweet. It had a very soft texture.
In this well, who owns the well? Is it like a public well? Like who dug the hole? Is there someone there right now just like bringing up water and bottling it as we speak? Is it on private land? Is it a secret spot?
Well, the man where I originally got it from, he sold his property, and then I hadn't have any access to it anymore. And then some amazingly beautiful people, Ross and Shona, they live just not very far from him down the road, and they have all of the certification and everything to get it out of the ground and to bottle it. They even have DHB approval, which is a district health board approval to have the water to be sold. So they've gone out of their way to make sure that they've ticked all the boxes. And they have recently started to put it into boxes and are able to sell it. I recommended that water stay out of the light. Any spring water, for example, or water that's come from under the ground, it's very sensitive to light. It's sort of like being born and then having floodlights put on you. That would be rather shocking. So water holds basically the structures of that water are held for a much longer time if that water doesn't see light. And it's particularly sensitive to artificial light. So if you get a spring water, for example, the crystallographic structures essentially look like what I call a star fern hexagon, very much like the pattern you might see as a snowflake, except that you can see them with your naked eye in the crystallography that I do. It's very clear, and those patterns are big. So the bigger the better as far as energetic state of health goes within a hexagonal pattern crystallographically. And so when you go to the store, because I teach beginners workshops how to use my technique and freezing technique, and people will say, oh, I've got spring water, it's going to look like the one that you have taken a photo of. The reason it looks like that is because I froze it within an hour of collection, and I kept it in the dark. If you have water in a plastic bottle, for example, and it's a clear plastic bottle and it's in a supermarket exposed to lots of unnatural light, these structures start to degrade quite rapidly. So when people are getting their spring water, you usually only have a tiny little indicator that it was spring water by the time they are doing crystallography with it. So all of this to say that I became very curious about what made this water different. And I went to an analysis, and I was trying to think, well, what's in the water that makes it so special? And what is it because it's naturally high alkaline? Is it because of something else? What else do I look for? And so I ended up starting to do some research around what makes water special, what makes different waters different, why is holy water holy? Is it not, is there anything other than the fact that people, bless it and pray in it? Is there something different? And I ended up realizing that by looking at an analysis, all I am really looking at is what's in the water, not what water is. So then if you ask the question to a scientist, well, what is water? They'll tell you it's H2O, it's two hydrogens and an oxygen. That's just general science. It's nothing that nobody is unaware of. But somebody else said to me something that really resonated. They said, well, yes, and the two hydrogens are feminine in the mode of levity, and the large oxygen is masculine in the mode of gravity, and together they create liquid water on Earth. That made me very curious about the fact that there could be much more to this thing that we call water. And then there was a scientist who suggests that actually water is only one part matter. It's the hydrogens and oxygen, but the rest is all light, photonic light, which means that water is a container of light. It's a lighthouse. And that then led me on to hearing and reading about people talking about things like water being able to store information, which is sometimes termed as water memory. And there were 3 people whose work or observations inspired me to start my crystallographic method, which is a very, very long way of answering your question. It's like what got me started into this. But the first person became very well known. He was not embraced by the scientific community at all because he essentially chose the best photos to display what he was trying to say that the water could do, and that was Masaru Emoto. So he would take many, many photos and choose the best one of them to share as a contrasting photo between love and hate. And so there were varied issues from a scientific point of view, but certainly what he did do with only about 8 contrasting photos was open people up to the idea that they are bodies of water sensitive to thoughts and sounds and environment, frequencies, and all of these things. And because we are such visual creatures, being able to see the difference between love and hate and, these things piqued the curiosity of so many people, and it really resonated with many people. For me personally, I would say that Laurent Costa, he's a French microscopic photographer, flash freezing water in a similar way to Emoto, but rather than experimenting on water, Laurent felt like water was his spiritual teacher. So he was in a relationship with the water he was working with in a way in which is much more aligned to an indigenous perspective. And he wanted to remain more of an observer. He wanted to not influence the water if it was possible. He wanted to see what water might show him. So sometimes, however, being human, he looked at the water and he sometimes smiled at it before he'd flash freeze it. And he was seeing not only geometries like Emoto did, but he was also seeing smiley faces in the water. He was seeing hearts. He was seeing pictures of fish and cats, things very relative to something that had happened to him during that day or something that he had been thinking about. And that fascinated me because what he was seeing was art. And it's not that geometry isn't art, but art is a very sophisticated form of communication. We rely upon the people who had drawn pictures in caves all the way back when for us to know what they were seeing, what they were feeling, what they were expressing. So art itself, by picking up a pen or, some charcoal and drawing something is a very human trait. So to be able to actually see recognizable imagery fascinated me. And lastly, there was Thomas Hieronymus, and Thomas was a radionic engineer, and he went into a Parisian meat market on a very cold day, and he made the observation that the freshly placed organs of an animal seemed to be affecting the way the frost froze on the glass behind where they were placed. For example, the frost would freeze into the shape of a liver organ above a liver organ, and with a heart organ, and so on and so forth. And he put that down to there being water in the blood. And I would suggest that water in all its stages is always in some kind of communion with itself. The hardest stage for water to be in communion with, though, is in a solid form. But in liquid crystal, which is the state between liquid and ice, it's the state of formation and also the state of melting. That is actually a very, very informative stage. So each organ has something called a sonic signature. It's like a cymatic imprint of form and function. So he believed that that was sharing information with the water in the air. And the water in the air, as it hit the glass, became frost and took on the form of the information. And that was a fascinating concept to me, because not only was he seeing imagery, but he was seeing it with his naked eye, and he wasn't using a microscope. And that then led me on to think, well, I'm a researcher, but I worked professionally as an oil painter also for many years. And so we're all rather multifaceted. And I had been studying to be an archaeologist. So my area of interest was in archaeology, but I I have gifts as a researcher. So I had been working on a separate project. I had a glass petri dish. And so I thought, well, the secret seems to be in the freezing, where the unseen becomes seen. Let me see, if this idea of water memory is actually a real thing, or if it's not. Like, you can read about stuff, but it's different when you do it yourself. And so I didn't know any better, like what about different stages of freezing in the very early stages. So I put some of the spring water that I had a healing experience with into the petri dish. And I was looking at it thinking, oh, why don't I try something wild? That seemed wild to me at the time. I'm going to project a thought, into the water. I'm going to see what happens. So I was holding the dish thinking, well, what should I think about? And there was a little bit of fluff floating around in the dish. So I put my hand in to take out the fluff, and I thought, oh, I wonder if my hand will have any impact on the water's quote unquote memory. So I thought, well, that thought will do. And I put it into the freezer with my peas and broccoli and everything else. And then I pulled it out. Hours later, it was frozen as a solid. Now, I haven't frozen water solid in 9 years. I don't do that anymore. It's really important for people to know that. So, but I pulled it up, held it up to the light, and I took my very first photograph. And the image was very large. It took up half the petri dish, which was about the size of my hand. 10 centimeters in diameter was the size of the dish. The image in the ice of what looked like an X-ray of my hand took up half that size dish. So that's macroscopically huge. I mean, that's just a visible image at this point. And I was flabbergasted, because it was so undeniably a hand, the image of a hand, that when Dr. Gerald Pollack, after I got to know him a few years later, suggested to me to address a couple of things. One is pareidolia, and also one is image recognition. So he said, why don't you put a questionnaire together with 25 photos, simply asking, what does this look like to you? So I did that, and I gave it to people I know to circulate around social media, so people didn't know what they were looking at, and they didn't know that it came from me. At this stage, no one knew my work. And I had 298 people do that survey, and 85% of the people were able to recognize the image for what the influence was prior to freezing. And 3 of those images, 100% of people could recognize. And one of them was that hand image. So the next one I did, I thought, well, if any water is going to be naturally informed, it's got to be seawater. So I went to the ocean, because I lived close by, and I froze a very thin layer of seawater. And I thought, well, if I see anything relative to the ocean in here, then maybe this isn't some random coincidence. Because at that point, I still very much had that in my mind, thinking, well, maybe this is some really random coincidence. And so I ended up,
Vita, when you sort of freeze the water against those 20 images, how do you go about that? Do you like put an image and then put the sort of sample on the petri dish on top of it, and then as it freezes, it will look like the image underneath? Is that how you did that?
oh, that's a good question. Over the many years, I have used all different types of influences and stimuli, and also I have attempted to not do anything. So for the seawater, the image was of a fish. I didn't project a thought, I didn't use a picture. I simply froze seawater with nothing, simply wondering what if I see something.
And how about for the 20 images you sent for the survey?
Okay. So for the other ones with the survey, some were from putting a leaf into the water, removing it, and then seeing an imprint of a leaf. Some were from printing out a picture, putting the petri dish of water on top of it for 30 seconds. That's always my protocol. It's not too long, it's not too short. Removing and then freezing. Sometimes I use words. Sometimes I use photographs of people because that's been a really important piece whereby when you show different faces and see faces relative to the photo, then you realize there is really an absorption of information, but what we're not seeing is a photocopy. This is a really interesting part too. It's still an artistic expression, but it's a recognizable one. So that always fascinated me. So for those 25 photos, they were all art. But over the years, I've seen that it is not only art that people see. There are three things that you will see when you do this work. You might see one, you might see all of them in a dish, you might see two types in a dish. But the first one, and this is the one I usually recommend people start with, is that you'll see a signature pattern. So over the years, I've worked with lots of waters to see what their natural patterns are. And to do that, it's not you just don't do it just once and go, oh, that's its natural pattern. You have to do this a lot of times. And by the time you've done the crystallography about 10 times in a row, any kind of expectation starts to go away and you actually get much more of a realistic result. And so I tend to go with the last, from 10 onwards to see what a signature pattern really is. And what's nice is that I have a team all around the world working with these types of waters, and we do see the same patterns. So spring water forms that what I call star fern hexagon, which looks like a six-pointed star with ferns off each leg. And if you were to join it together, it would look like a hexagon. Then you would have a signature pattern of water that's gone through a filter. It looks like compacted lines all together. Then rainwater forms a fanning pattern with a curve. Seawater tends to form what looks like lots of tiny little indented subwoofers with stars inside. And tap water tends to be very, very disordered, lots and lots of lines and dots, like Legos all over the floor. So you get to see, there's these different types of signature patterns.
And Vita, for the audience that's listening, is this something that they can simply try themselves, or is this very hard to do?
It's very easy to do. Children are doing it. That's a cool thing. It's like I haven't done, I just kind of, I don't know, stumbled upon learning how to do this.
Because the most common experiment I heard about was sort of how if you have two sets of water, one water you're just saying, I love you, I love you, I love you, and the other one you're just yelling at, like, you suck, you're worthless, and you do this experiment, you can see a clear difference in both waters. How can the audience test this for themselves?
Well, my technique is really easy, and doing controls for those is also really helpful, where you have two where you don't have any influence at all. Um, So the technique I can just tell you and people can get it on my website. If they want it to get it for free, we're just setting it up where if you subscribe, you get the technique for free. We're in the process of that. But right now, if you put the code blessing, the word blessing in the code as you check out, you can just get the PDF of how to do it for free. But essentially, like I mentioned, I don't freeze water solid. So as I became more familiar with what's called the fourth phase of water, the stage between liquid and ice, I call it the state of creation. And so in this stage is where there is essentially liquid still on top and ice is formed underneath. Now, I only use glass petri dishes because essentially glass is made of silica. Silica is a type of crystal and it helps water to store information for longer, but it's also hydrophilic, sorry. So it is water loving, whereas I don't use plastic because it's hydrophobic and it can make the water open up in the center. It can be very problematic. So you want to be able to get a dish which is a good size. So you can order them, glass petri dishes, just give it a Google. But when you get your petri dish, it will come with a lid. So the ones I like to use are 10 centimeters in diameter. I don't know what that is in inches, sorry. And I'll give you a ratio. So if you don't have that size, you've got a smaller size or a bigger size, you just use the ratio of water. So, but whenever you get a petri dish, it comes with a lid. So the question people ask me often is, do you cover the dishes in the freezer? And the answer is no, for two reasons. One's a very practical reason, one's a very not practical reason. The very practical reason is when you are beginning this work, what you want to be able to do is open the freezer and see what's happening in your dish. If it's covered, there'll be a frost that will form on the top of that dish. So you will have to take it off. It's going to be a really big issue. So when you're learning how to do this, you want to be able to see what's happening in the dish. Now, once you've got the hang of it and you know your timing really well, you know what you're looking for, actually having the lid on can be fun because the frost is like another layer of information and you can take that lid off and actually photograph the frost. But you have to do that inside the freezer because it will melt so fast. Now, the right amount of ratio is if you have a 10 centimeter diameter dish and you just want to have the bottom literally just covered with water. It's about 2 tablespoons of water. So there's about 3 or 4 millimeters of water thick within the dish, just literally just covering the bottom. If you put 2 tablespoons in and it keeps opening up in holes, add a tiny bit more in so you've just got the right layer. Then when you tip that dish slightly, you should have 1/4 pooling of water and 3/4 empty. And that's the ratio you want for any round unit you're using. So if you're using a smaller dish, you'll use less water, but there will be 1/4 pooling and 3/4 empty when you tip the dish slightly. If you're desperate to try and you can't wait for your petri dish, some people are enjoying using these big or small glass Pyrex baking trays. So you can just put a very thin layer of water in that and use them. Some people use a flat-bottomed glass, which can be good, but they're usually not that big, but you can still see crystallography form in them. So once you have the correct amount of water in your dish, I always recommend don't launch into this going, okay, water now, show me my phone, show me my face. Because if this is a relationship, this is about literally getting to know something of which I don't think we know what it is.
And will this work with tap water?
When I do beginners workshops, people use all kinds of water. Many people are using tap water. I recommend people use tap water. You know why? Because tap water is the best, and I don't like this word, but it's the best control. Because municipal tap water tends to be quite disordered. So if you get to see, okay, it's quite disordered, and then you do something to it, maybe you play sounds or you do whatever you want, and that you will see a difference. You see that its structures start to improve. So if its structures improve, but it doesn't change chemically, what is it that we're actually witnessing? What are these structures actually? And what I think we're literally seeing is the energetic health of water, very much akin to an emotion. We're starting to see water kind of, if you will, feeling better, because tap water is appears to be extremely sensitive to attention. So it's actually rare on my beginners workshops where everybody's viewing the water and there's such a lot of attention on the water that the municipal tap water that a lot of people are using, it very often starts to look quite different than tap water because there is so much attention being put on it. And I find I mean, that's really interesting to me. So we start to see that actually, you know, tap water, and I've worked with lots of tap water, when you start giving, it's like, if you think about it, it's a little bit like somebody that's been ignored for so long, because people say to them, you know, often, well, you don't want to drink that. It's all these poisons in it. It's so nasty. And well, so that's all some people have is filtered tap water at the best. That's what they can afford. So what can they do? And so I don't look at water and go, that's terrible. We don't want that. I mean, the poor water, it's not its fault. It's got chlorine and it's got this and it's got that in it. So working with tap water shows me that it's very much like someone who literally is ignored all the time. And then when somebody pays attention to that person, it's like such a big deal. You see such a like, oh my God, somebody noticed me. And I see that it's actually extremely sensitive, very, very much like an emotional upliftment. You could say that tap water is a little bit like someone who's sick. So if you know that someone's been diagnosed with something and they're very unwell, but somebody comes to the door, they bring them a basket of food or some flowers and gives that person attention, gives them a blanket, makes them a cup of tea, that person's going to feel better because that's like, oh, thank you. They feel grateful. They feel cared about. But technically, they might still be sick. So what's interesting about that is that anyone on any natural healing journey would probably agree that the best place to start your healing journey is an attitude of gratitude. And what we see structurally in water with tap water is that when tap water is given positive, caring, genuine attention, its structures improve significantly. And that is very much like somebody who is unwell, feeling grateful and feeling better. And from that, any change structurally that we see in water is the potential, I believe, for change for human beings.
Got it. So that means tap water is probably the best sort of constant to start with for the experiment. So they put in 2 teaspoons of water, thin layer, tap water works. What's then the next step, Veda?
So then what you want to do is, I mean, that you could then inspire the water in any way, but I recommend let's just start getting to learn the crystallography technique before you start doing all that. The next thing you would then do is put it into the freezer, your household freezer. Now, everybody's freezer settings are going to be different, so your freezing time will vary slightly. If you are using a Pyrex dish, this thick glass makes the water freeze a little longer. So in my freezer, it's set at minus 14 degrees Celsius. So it's not like super cold, but it's somewhere in between. I have a relatively modern freezer. And I've brought the setting down to be most like most people's freezers, so I can teach it. So when I put my timer on for 5 minutes and 30 seconds in the freezer, and what we want to see is there being liquid water on top and ice has formed underneath. It is very easy to see. You won't miss it. But if you're worried that you are going to miss it, you can just put the light on your phone and shine it into the dish. You will see crystallography would have started to form. Now, if it hasn't and it's completely liquid and there's like nothing happening in there, don't worry, that happens really normal. That's normal for different people's freezers. You need longer. Shut the freezer, don't touch it, and give it another 3 minutes. And continue to do that until you see that crystallography has started to form on the bottom. Now, when you finally get to the stage where you see that there's water on top and ice underneath, then you need to take it out of the freezer. And this part needs to happen relatively fast, especially if it's warm where you live, because the ice will melt. That is the thing to navigate. But you usually have about a minute to do all of this. So you take it out of the freezer you tip the liquid away, you wipe the back with a paper towel, and then because it's a small dish, you hold it, and then you have your phone, essentially, and you basically photograph the structures you find interesting, take a backed out photograph, try not to be in direct light, move your phone around until you get the best lighting, and that's it. That's it. And the only things people ask me are, do the things in the freezer influence the ice and the water? And I would say that 98% of the time, no, because most things that are frozen are in a kind of state of suspension. However, if there is something in there with a big word on it, occasionally water will pick up on that word and design something relative to the word. It doesn't always happen. I've been doing this prolifically nearly every day for 10 years. And so 98% of the time, I don't see that things get influenced by things in the freezer. I like to put my dish on the top shelf. I have an allocated top shelf. For people with like pull-out freezers, they're the most difficult to work with because you can, when you're trying to see is it ready, then everything shakes and then you get an overlap of ice and it's a nightmare. You have to put yours on the bottom. You have to take the bin thing out and put the dish on the bottom. So then you can see what's happening in there. And those people need to start with 6 minutes instead of 5 minutes 30, because it will take a little longer being on the bottom shelf. If you live in Utah, where in the winter, where it's freezing, or anywhere it actually gets freezing, you don't have to use a freezer. You can do what my friend John does, go outside, put the thin layer of water in your petri dish and literally watch it freeze. Then you basically tip the liquid water away and you photograph the crystallography. That's my dream thing to do. It just doesn't get cold enough in New Zealand to do that.
Okay, so that means I could invite some friends over, maybe have, say, let's say it's me and two other friends. We'll have 3-piece dish. We'll put in the water, we'll put into the fridge, wait 5-6 minutes, take it out, take photos, and this would be our sort of, I guess, our constant, our control. And then we can do another round where we maybe play some music and repeat it and see if it changes. Or maybe we'll do another second round of control. And then within, I guess, a 1.5 hour period with me and friends, we can probably do, I guess, 6 to 7 rounds of this. And I guess maybe on the 3rd and 4th round, we can play some music. The 5th round, we can talk to the water and say negative things. And then on the 7th and 8th round, we can say positive things versus negative and see the difference. And it could be like a cool afternoon activity, just like that.
Lots of people do that. So people have like crystallography parties. I was just talking to someone earlier today that said that her and friends have just got together and done exactly that. They've done slightly different things, like they've used Reiki energy or they've done, this kind of stuff. But what I present is that I have over 55,000 photos of water responding in these intelligent ways through art, specifically for me, because I'm an artist. But if you're super mathematical and logical, people tend to see the third thing. So they see a signature pattern, an artistic expression, or something that I've just called hydroglyphs. And a hydroglyph is essentially a symbol, now I have about 47 symbols, that I need to have seen repeat at least 50 times using the same word influence, not just in English, but in many languages. And that essentially means that it's not random. And what we've also found, because it's not just me doing it, this is lots of people doing it, is that, for example, if you have the word for water in English, it looks like these kind of wave patterns. In fact, it looks exactly like the word creation, except in creation, it's got these, what we call the seeds. There's these 3 little seeds, as well as this wavy, fiery pattern. But for water, the seeds aren't in it. But when you use that word in Hebrew, because one letter in Hebrew means something, It's a very complex language, much, much more so than English. And I'm sure in other languages like Chinese as well, that you see this, we've seen the same symbol appear, but with other glyphs that we don't even know what they mean yet appear. So that there's a complexity of understanding of what that might mean. And now, is water reading words? I would say that no, water's not reading words. No, water is absorbing the energy of a word. You know, we can say that words have energy because words make us feel things. Just ask somebody who's ever been bullied. Ask anyone who's ever been complimented when they're feeling bad. Words do have power. So when you write a word, it's almost like that's the most reduced version of it. But it's like water somehow takes that information and reverse engineers it back to some kind of living principle, some kind of symbolism that we can not only see and photograph, but that we can actually embody. Because my children, especially my daughter, when she was like 9, she grew up with me doing this crystallography. And one day I had a particularly beautiful crystallographic sample. And she said, "Oh, Mummy, can I have that?" And I gave it to her because I thought she wanted to look at it. But she started to eat the ice. And I said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And she said, "It's good for me, Mummy." I was like, "Oh, okay." And then her brother, some weeks later, did the same thing completely separate to Shanti. And then over the years, I've been teaching parents, and they just come and they say, "Hey, my children keep eating the ice. Like, what is that normal?" And I'm like, I actually think it is quite normal for children to do that. So then, without getting to the long story, because everything has a story, which would be here for hours to get into it, all of it. But the condensed part is that we discovered about 2 years ago that when you write a word, if you have like been having trouble sleeping, and the word that kind of comes out of the well of knowledge within you is rest, but it might not be something so logical. It might be like a color. Like I had a headache and I used the word purple because that was the first word that came to my mind. I'm like, I'm not going to question it. I'm just going to write the word purple. But if you're using the word rest, you put your dish of water on top of that word for 30 seconds. You can use a minute. Like I like 30 seconds, but people are going to do it the way people want to do it. And then you put it into the freezer.
So when I have friends over and I play the music or I say, I love you, I love you, should we do it over 30 seconds? Is that the sweet spot, Veda?
That's my sweet spot. That's but you got to do it how you feel best for you. So that's just the protocol I recommend to people. What is quantum? People think that if we leave it there for longer, it's going to give the biggest imprint. Actually, no, water it's moving in its liquid stage. Water is updating its information every trillionth of a second. So the question would then be, from a scientific perspective, well, of course, water can't store memory if it's moving that rapidly and the hydrogen bonds are breaking apart and moving and doing all of this. How can it store information? Like, how is that even possible, right? So that's a good question. But then, so a scientist would say water in its liquid stage is in molecular chaos. But if you asked a quantum physicist, which I did, how is this possible? They would say, yeah, but there's a big difference between molecular chaos and molecular excitement. He was saying what you're doing with your conscious expression is getting the water into a state of molecular excitement. When you're excited, you usually have a reason for it. There's usually something you're excited about. So that means the water is very much more receptive. Now, given that water is so much percentage of light, and that I'll tell you a really quick story about a lady who said that she was indigenous. She said she could speak to bees. And she said that she would watch their hives for long periods of time until one day a bee somehow communicated to her and said, "We don't mind you looking at our hive, but please don't look at it for so long because your conscious expression is putting too much light in the hive and we like it to be darker." So that was an aha moment for me, because over this many years of watching water freeze, which has been literally a decade, every now and then, if I get the timing just right, I open the freezer and the ice is just starting to form a little tiny, like spear shape. At the end of that, I've actually filmed and photographed light coming out of the ice that looks like a halo. It's literally like a little light. I actually think it is light that paves the way for the design of the imagery, and where there is light, water will follow. So it's like the light is being pushed out of the water, and as it's forming into ice, it embodies it. And it is the human biosystem, which again, if water is mostly light that we are emitting, that conscious expression is actually, and heartfelt electricity is where water and light pick up information, and there is an information exchange, which is then embodied by the water and then crystallized into form. So the information is in the water, which we can't see in its liquid stage because it's liquid, but we can see as it forms. Now, will water always do what we want? No. The moment you try to control it, water reminds us that water is wild, which is why I say this is a relational work. Any indigenous cultures, well, my father is native New Zealand Maori, and we have this connection to water where we consider water not to be a resource, but a relative. It's like where our ancestors are. And so relational kind of interactions with nature are considered very real and valuable. So do you have to have that kind of relationship? No, here's how I recommend we approach this. And you talk about the I hate you and the I love you scenarios that obviously Emoto did, and with the rice experiments. But with what I found is that if you don't hate, water will know you're lying. You know, it actually has to come from a feeling. Water is like a lie detector test. Just because you say something doesn't mean that's what you mean. So water knows when you mean it, and you know when you mean it. And so I have found that when I'm really frustrated and angry, and that doesn't happen often, but I'm real, that life happens. I have 3 children, there is traffic, there is stuff, life happens. And perhaps I'm committed to doing some crystallography for somebody, and I need to have it done the next day. So I have to do this work because I've said I would. And I'm just genuinely annoyed and angry. So when doing the work, and say I'm putting flowers in the water and doing some work like they've asked me to, and seeing whether there'll be an imprint of their remedy or whatever it is, every time water won't work. It won't design any complex imagery with me at all. It will not design. In fact, it will kind of compact upon itself and become thicker and darker, which is very unusual for the state of freezing, because the ice that we're actually photographing is only like a couple of millimeters thick, and it's very light, which is why when you look at my work, you're going to see lots of colors coming through. All the background colors come through. I'm artistic. I like to play with them. Other people like to have it set in a more, traditional setting. So with real anger, frustration, we seem to have a response in ice that is like a no, basically. I won't play in that. Not out of judgment, but just because it doesn't resonate at that lower frequency. However, if I'm sad and I'm doing crystallography, say the same deal with plants or flowers or something, again, if I'm genuinely sad, water will override what I'm doing with it, and it will just design sad faces all day long. There's been multiple times where water has done things that I didn't expect it to do, which come across as intelligent. I'm saying water is not just reactive, it's responsive, and it's freaked a lot of people out.
Veda, does that mean when you do the control and you do nothing to it, it might already be subconsciously reacting to your current state of mind?
I think that might have been happening in the early stages when I first started doing this work, but because I do it every day, And because the way I work with water is no longer about trying to remove myself from it, from the equation, I've actually don't see how you can, because it appears that we've had people send a thought from the US to New Zealand, and we see that thought in the ice, and I don't know what they've thought. So, there is an entanglement there, which is why I have adopted a different perspective. For me, my perspective is that after all of this time with working with water, I think I've come into what I might term as the family stage. With your children, for example, or your family members, they know you. They've known you since you were a little kid. They've known you your whole life. They know what you look like at your best, at your worst. You don't need to put on a good face. You don't need to impress them. They're going to love you no matter what anyway. And the way your children look at you, honestly, you don't have to put your makeup on. You don't have to get your hair done. Nothing matters. You are mum or dad to them. So this is the relationship that I kind of feel like I've got to with water, where I'm not trying anymore to work with water to see what will it do, what will it do. Well, I've seen that water does much, much more than I could have ever imagined. I'm far more interested now in just working with water automatically, as opposed to working with water with a great deal of hope and thought and intention. I think I'm at a stage where it's almost like the energy of water is just playing with me. We just work together as if we have been best friends. We already know what each other are thinking. So I think that because I see other people who have never done this before, that don't have, and that are actually skeptical, they often can get really accurate results from signature patterns, where you say, okay, this is the signature pattern. We keep seeing this pattern in this type of water. So that can be very helpful when it's more of the art that I really want to see a picture like Veda sees. But water responds to me artistically, I think, because I see the world artistically, because I'm an artist. Whereas hydroglyphs seem to be what people who have more of an analytical mind see. I mean, I see all of it, but expecting to know what water is going to show, I think it's more around leaving expectations behind and actually just stepping into curiosity. For people who are super skeptical, then I would say just be curious, because you will see a signature pattern, an artistic expression, or hydroglyphs. And hydroglyphs, they are these symbols that have multiple layers of meaning. So we see the same symbol. For example, light will show what we call the empty star. Guidance will show the empty star. If you have the creation glyph, we know it means the energy of the word creation, but it is also the energy of the word fire. So they seem to be able to have multiple layers of meaning. And I have so many people around the world now helping me discover the many layers of meaning of hydroglyphs. And that's what I'm speaking at the annual water conference about this year in Lisbon. I'm doing half an hour completely strictly only on repeatability of my work with hydroglyphs. I'm not going into what does it mean. Jerry Pollack has said, don't go out there and do all your woo-woo stuff, just stick to the repeatability. I'm like, yes, sir, because there's a need for that for some people, and it's important and for water science to move in this direction. People want to be able to see, oh, well, show me 64 examples then. So I do.
Love that. Okay, I wrote down a ton of questions just based on, I guess, those initial questions. I guess, I'd love to you briefly mentioned that US experiment. Tell us about that. The whole person from US somehow sending you a thought.
Well, it was really good because it was quite random.
Yeah.
It was remote thought. So I have a friend in the States, and she'd recently got married. I hadn't had a chance to meet her new husband yet or any of that stuff. We're kind of more work friends, And so we were on a Zoom call, and I said, look, I've just started doing some work where I'm asking certain people I have a connection with to send a thought into my dish of water over here, and we'll just see what happens. You've got nothing to lose, right? So she said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And then her husband came over in the Zoom and said, oh, hi, nice to meet you. And I'm like, oh, hi. And then I said, oh, hey, it would be super cool, although it seems random, if you wouldn't mind doing this. That I just asked, my friend to do it, but I don't even know you really. I don't know much about you.
When you asked your friend to do it, did you like sort of bring up the peachy juice and put it into the webcam and have a put a thought into it, or was it in the fridge? How did you get her to do it?
I just tipped my laptop down so she could see the empty dish, and I just stepped away, gave her a minute, and then came back and immediately froze it. But what happened was her husband came and said hi, and I asked him to do it instead because I didn't know it would. I said, well, this is really random because I don't really know about him at all. And I think he thought it was like a crazy idea. um, and so he did it. He was a good sport. And what was interesting was that he thought something that I would never, ever think. Because I've been vegetarian since I was 8, right? And he's a hunter, and he was literally preparing to go hunting for pheasant. And so he was imagining holding a pheasant that he'd caught. And I did the crystallography, and you can see there's this hand holding what looks like a bird and long tail. And he was a little like, he thought that was a bit much. I thought it was pretty fun. And I've done the same thing with a friend in India, and she's always had a fear of drowning, like massive fear of drowning. And so I did the same thing where I put the dish in front of my computer screen. I tipped it down so she could just see the empty water. And then when she said she'd got the thought, I just froze it. And so, unbeknownst to me, because we hadn't spoken, for a few months, she'd been getting therapy for her fear of drowning. And so, in the therapy session, the therapist had said, just imagine, let's start with imagining. Imagine that you're standing in a river with your waist above water, and just get comfortable in that imagining to start with. So my friend, because she's a Hindu, she was imagining that she was standing in the river Ganges, because she thought even in imagination, if she dies in her imagination, she's in the Ganges, so that's a good place to die. And so in her imagination, she would imagine standing on a stone with her head above water, and the water, being up to here. This was as much as she could manage. And so that's what, because she'd already been working on that visualization, that's what she visualized and put into the water. And when I froze the water, and she didn't tell me that, there was an image of what looks like a person on a stone, and there was a clear mark where a waterline would be around the neck. So there was another one, which is also in my new book, where I just show these examples. We've only done 3. We haven't done hundreds, and I have such a lot. I've had a year's worth of crystallography to do. So
Vita, like, do you think the energy or the thought is sort of going into the webcam and your screen is reproducing it, like our conversation right now, or is my energy somehow being sent to you in New Zealand? How do you think that is working?
I don't think water is held to time or space, and nor do I think that we ever even think about water in the air. Water in the air is a very real thing, and its ability to share information, I genuinely think, is quantum and not relative to time and space. I think it's more that the water in the air, it's sort of like, I think that dogs and cats, for example,
Is
can
it
see things we can't see. Sorry.
is it similar to the whole thing of like the mouse learning how to get through the maze in New York, and all of a sudden, once the mouse in New York figures out the maze, somehow all the mouse in London now know how to go through the maze, and I think there's a lot of studies on how when animals figure things out in one side of the world, that same flock of animals on the other side of the world figure it out, and similar thing is happening here. is that quantum energy just traveling through the water in the air? Or yeah, or what's your thoughts?
I think there's a lot of things we don't know, and you're talking about morphic resonance, and the 100th monkey effect, which we know is a very real thing. But I think that this is really around quantum tunneling, quantum physics, and entanglement. I think that when people think of one another, regardless of if they live far away, there is a feeling that is received, very much like if you've just been thinking about someone for a long time and all of a sudden they ring you because they felt that quantum nudge, oh, I should think about that, I should ring them. There is a lot of things we don't see, we don't fully understand, of which I think we're starting to get visuals for in the ice now. The way in which I think information exchange happens is not necessarily as practical as we might think, because we're thinking too hard about how this works. Whereas we're energetic beings and we can tell when there's something wrong without somebody even telling us. If it's like you get a sense, oh, I hope that person's okay. They seemed really off, but they didn't say anything. Their face might have been perfectly normal, but you feel it. So it's not so extreme to think that, if you are projecting some thought towards a source of water, that it will pick it up, regardless of where you are. Technology has brought us even closer together. Back when I was a girl, I used to have pen pals, right? And we would write letters to each other, and that's what we had. But these days, we can pick up a phone and just be on FaceTime with somebody in England, which I was just on earlier. And that gives us the feeling like we're closer to them because we can see them, we can see that they're talking to us, we have immediate interactions. But we're not right together, but we feel like we can have that connection. It helps us feel closer to somebody. So the only difference is that we're seeing them. So reality is that we are very sensitive, liquid, crystal, energetic beings. We're only a cut away from leaking. We're only an emotion away from leaking. We're a lot of other things away from leaking. But when we look at each other with our eye lens, which is 99% water, and by molecular count, not by volume, we're 99% highly ordered, structured water beings. There are more water molecules in our bodies than stars in the Milky Way, and more water molecules in our bodies than all of the people on the surface of Earth. And those molecules are reading our potential, our greatest potential. And I say that because when you put a seed, for example, with me, when I put a sunflower seed into the water and then remove it, it doesn't show me the sunflower seed, it shows me the sunflower. It shows the potential of the seed. Same thing with an apple seed. It shows me the apple. And then when I let that water melt, and this is an interesting thing I recommend people try, is that when you let the water melt after it's frozen and then refreeze it an hour later or straight away, or maybe 3 days later, with biological things like seeds, we often see that the imprint lasts for quite a long time, sometimes weeks within that same sample. And what that shows me is that water is literally reading the potential of the seed. So this is an important piece because even in the oldest shriveled up seed, there's 10% water. So water is in communication with itself.
You put the seed in the petri dish, and does oftentimes like salt or particles fall off from the seed and it's now in the water? And is that okay?
Oh, the seeds that I've been using, we just clean them.
Oh, hmm.
Yeah, it's fine. Most seeds are clean. And ideally you're not getting like soil bits in there. You just give it a clean first. So the information exchange is very clear. But it's just like, I think that humans, I think we communicate far, far more with our body language than with words. We sense things very well. And so, there's been many times when people I know have been overseas, and I've just gone, oh, I hope I've got a bad feeling. I'm going to give them a call. And then something has happened to them. So how do we know that when we were not even there? Same thing with when you're projecting thoughts into water. It's like, well, it's actually a direct focused thought. And there is a receiver at the other end, which has been prepared consciously to be received. It's a receptive water, which is also like a mirror. I think water is a mirror of the divine within us. And so it is able to then be crystallized into that moment of thought. And there's, again, explaining it can be difficult because we're not really living in that world all of the time in the way in which science would tell us. Science might tell us differently.
Yeah. Do you like, does all of everything you've shared today, is it all somehow tied towards a God or universe? Or do you have any thoughts on that? Is there a God based on sort of everything we've talked about today? Yeah. How there does seem to be like this unity. Water seems to have a conscious.
I think it's a good inquiry. And I think that I've often said that water is the house of the divine, because where there is light, which is what I see water contain, there is often information. There is something of a divine nature there.
When you say water contains light, what does that mean, Veda?
It contains photonic light. So water is constantly absorbing light. So that's why it looks, if you look at a little drop of water in the light, or even if you just look at it, it's reflecting light and it's absorbed light. So that's one of the reasons that the sea is, the color of the sky. It's a reflector. It's absorbing the light and the color from where it was, from the sun or the clouds or the sky. And so it is absorbed, actually, and you can measure the light absorption with a spectrometer. So there's all kinds of ways. So it's very actually easy to prove that water is an absorber of light. So it's holding photonic light. That's what I mean by a container of light. So if water was the holy grail, its contents would be light. And as far as water and God goes, well, hydrogen, my friend, Isabel friend, she was investigating, if water had spirit, what would that spirit be? And she thinks it would be hydrogen. So hydro and gen means hydrogen, means the hydro as in water and gen as in Genesis, the creator of water. And then if you have the sun, which is a great big ball of hydrogen, and you have evaporation, you're having the sun bringing the children back home. However, and I love that people have different ideas, my personal feeling is that if water was to have a spirit, that spirit would be condensed light. Because just as humans have a soul or a spirit, or some people think that it does, I do think that it does, and I think all life has a spirit within it. I think that the water within us is like this container, and the essence is light. And so for me, if water had a spirit, it would be condensed light. And so when you look at all different religions, water is always mentioned. Even in the Bible, it's mentioned 720 something times, more than love, more than faith, more than worship. The dew is considered to be like the Holy Spirit. Then you start looking at other indigenous wisdoms, and then there's always a creation story around water. In Islam, it says that water created all it was, everything is created from water. From all the different religions and Judaism, you start hearing this very, very special thing about water. And then even in the Bible, it says the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the deep. And that deep is water, is fluid. So even before creation, the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the deep, which is like any movement. And then there was the sound, the word. And when there is sound and the word, essentially, then you have a cymatic wave, like an imprint affecting the way that water moves and is designed. So you hear of all of these stories, and then you start to look upon water in a new way. In the Maori culture, the word for spirit is wairua. Wai means water, rua means two, the two waters, the physical and spiritual waters. I think one of the aspects of the spiritual nature of water is the observer. So if we have two worlds, the one we live on and the one we live in, the one we live in is felt through all the senses. We taste internally, we hear internally, we see actually internally, we smell internally, we touch and feel internally. What do we experience outside of this body? If all of those things are felt within it, all the feelings are felt within the body, well, one of the things we can do outside of the body is observe ourselves, whether that's through meditation, through psychedelic experiences, through dreaming, through near-death experiences. And then what is it that sees? It's a good question. So there was a study done on people who were born blind. And those people who are born blind claim that they've never dreamt in pictures, only in other senses. People who are blinded later in life dream in pictures like we do. So there was a study done, I think it was on 21 people who were born blind that had verifiable near-death experiences where there were doctors and people present when they came back into their bodies. And they all spoke about what they saw. They could describe what the room looks like, what the doctors looked like, what they saw as they passed on, and then came back into their body that was still blind, but were able to describe what they saw. And then some of them went on to dream in pictures. So the question then is, what is it that sees? And I think when you're talking about how the spirit, soul, or subtle body leaves the body, then one of the most logical explanations might be through the realm of water. And if soul or spirit is a direct spark of the greater spark of God, then I think that water is the container of all of these things, and that it is the life force energy that is the common denominator for all life, all life. And I think that this just, to me, it makes sense. So I was talking to Robert Edward Grant on a podcast a little bit while ago, and I've been saying for years that we know of 4 different states of water: a liquid, solid, gas, and then a type of gel or plasma. But I believe that there are more phases of water that we just haven't seen yet or observed yet. And within each of those 4 stages, there are subtleties, and the secrets are in the subtleties. So there are like over 300 different types of ice. And in each stage of ice, there is a subtle layer. So I think the state of air, the state of evaporation and vapor, there are many, many more stages to that. So it would make sense to me, given that I've spoken to so many people who have had near-death experiences and say they have a sense of rising, and then they look down upon their body as an observer with no attachment to the body, and then go on to have other experiences. As a gas rises, it expands. So it would make sense that as a gas, then there could be the observer and there could be the feeling of entirety of a soul or a spirit in relationship to the way it might exit the body as an ether, as a gas, or some other stage. Like, I think of it like a vibrational vapor that moves so fast we can't yet see it, but perhaps one day technology will be able to record that. To me, when people say the soul or the spirit leaves the body, that's one thing. We kind of tend to accept that, but how does it happen? I think that if it was to be explained, water would be the way it could happen, realistically. If that is a thing, if it really does happen like that, which I personally think that it does.
That's beautiful, Veda. I guess if we were wanting to leave the audience with some, I guess, health advice, actionable takeaways. What recommendation do you have for people when it comes to drinking water? You know, there's tap water, there's boiling it, there's getting a water pitcher, there's all these different filtration. It's so confusing, this space of water. Is there a simple sort of advice you'd give to people?
I'll take a quote from my friend Matt. He said, drink the water in your cup. And the reason I say that is this is a big first world problem, asking what kind of water should I drink? It isn't so much, well, just to say, of course, I don't recommend drinking municipal tap water unless it's at least gone through a filter. There is a lot in tap water that we do not want to become the filter for. There is a website called Find a Spring that shows you where the nearest springs are closest to you. When you can go and collect spring water, I think that's probably the best option I can suggest people do, because deep aquifers have been unaffected by the external area, by any sprays, anything, all that stuff. It's the deeper the aquifer, the more crystal clear, and it tastes so beautiful, the water. And if you know where your water came from, that forms this kind of relationship as well. If you can't do that, and perhaps you want to, just buy water. So I would say that if you have to buy water, then I would buy a spring water. And I would not buy an ionized water. The reason I say that is because that's not a stable pH water. It's been unnaturally ionized to bring the pH up, but that pH will drop very quickly. It's the natural minerals that make water stable in its pH and its potential power of hydrogen. It's also had a lot of electricity run through it to make it that pH. So there's a lot of things I don't personally like with that aspect. So I would go for a natural spring water. Doesn't have to have a high pH. It can be a 7.4 or something like that.
Just for our audience, because I'm also ignorant. What is spring water? Is spring water coming from mountain? Is it a well under the ground? Is it just part of like a river? What is spring water?
Spring water is water that is in an aquifer deep, deep under the earth. And it forms, and it organically comes up as a spring. So it's like springs forth up out of the ground. And when you actually go to see springs, they're beautiful because often springs will form and they're very, very clear. And you can see it's like bubbling underneath. It bubbles up. It looks almost like what you might imagine kind of bubbling hot pools looks like. So it actually is just bringing up all these little bubbles that come up in the spring. And so it's coming from deep inside the earth. And that's often thousands of years old. The water's been traveling through the earth and it's gone through all the filtration of the earth to finally bubble up to the surface of earth. And those springs will then often form organically on into rivers and streams. And their structures and things will change as they pick up all of the different things along the way till they finally get to the ocean. Then you have mountain water, so glacial water as well, where water has been ice and then it's starting to melt. And then you have something called glacial melt, which is, and it's sometimes called glacial milk, where it's actually a milky color. And the people in the Hunza Valley in northern Pakistan, it's a blue zone where people have lived the longest with the healthiest life. And they have lived entirely on glacial water, which is like thick, almost like a syrup. And they live up well into their hundreds, or centennials. That's normal for them. So a lot of their health has been looked at. Obviously, they live organically, they're in a community, they're not surrounded by Wi-Fi and all this stuff. But ionized water, like that came from people observing these incredible properties of this Hunza Valley water and trying to recreate it in a lab. So that's what that is. But I would say if you can collect water, or if you can go and just get the best water you have, even if you are working with a filtered water, get yourself like a blue glass bottle. So, I mean, this one's got like a little Ganesh on it. You can get all kinds with like love and like whatever you want. This friend of mine gave me this. You can get it from different places. One of my friends, she's got a company called Blue Bottle Love, where she has all kinds of blue bottles, but it has to be glass. And then what you want to do is put your water in the sunshine. I wonder if I can get the sunshine. Anyway, yes.
Why blue, by the way?
So blue, the color blue is a very potent in that it has a very significant way in which when light shines through blue glass, and it's the only time I would ever recommend putting water in the sunshine, because water is so sensitive to light. But when it's filtering through this blue colored glass, it changes the water structurally, but you make something called blue solar water with it. So with the blue solar water, after putting this into the sunshine for an hour, that's been used for many, 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 many years to help people who have gone through trauma, who are having high anxiety, who need to who are going through recovery of any kind. Where I had a doctor friend of mine, she's a pretty well-known surgeon, and she, is quite interested in what I do. And she had a personal friend of hers in a horrendous accident. And she said to me, what kind of water should I be giving her? Because the hospital water is terrible. What kind of water should I give her? I said, give her blue solar water. So she followed the protocol. She put it in the sun for an hour. She brought her friend, she got spring water, put it in the bottle.
Can that also be done with tap water by any chance?
Yeah, as long as the tap water's gone through a filter. I mean, if tap water is the water that you like to drink, but I would always say,
And what type of filter do you recommend? There's so many different filters out there. Like, how do people, yeah.
I mean, that's going to be on the person who does the research. You have to do the research. But what you don't want in there is chlorine. Like, I remember when I was living in the desert, and we were in between LA and Las Vegas, literally in the middle of nowhere, right? And the water quality was just, it was very hard water. That means that in every case, you're going to get all the calcium, all the buildup on the showers, all the stuff, and it was tasted horrible. We could smell the chlorine. So we got a water softener for the entire house. And what happened was that the guy came over and he said, okay, well, let's do some tests. He wanted to test how much chlorine was in the water. So we got water in a glass. He did the little test, and it was like off the chart with chlorine, and we could smell it. Okay, if you're smelling it, you know it's not a good scene. So then he said, okay, now put your hand, he got me as their guinea pig, put your hand in the water that we've just tested and take it out. So I put my hand, he said, just leave it there for like 10 seconds. It's like, okay, and then take it out. And then he tested for chlorine. It wasn't there. There was none in it. My body had absorbed it all. I was like, oh my God, let's get this system immediately. Because we don't think about that. I think depending on where you live, like I'm grateful in New Zealand, we live rurally. So we have these catchment tanks outside where we have rainwater, and all we really need is a carbon filter, and our water is beautiful. People that have skin conditions like eczema, psoriasis, like even dandruff, stuff like that, right? Very common, acne. You often find that those people are living in the city and they don't have any kind of filter or anything like that on their shower. And so their water is very hard. You know, it's hard when you have all the buildup on the shower or in the bath or whatever you've got going on. So when you maybe go for a trip to the countryside where people are using rainwater or tank water, like I've got, or well water or something natural, you see within days all these things start clearing up because the type of water you're using is it really does affect your skin and hair.
If someone lives in the city, they live in an apartment, they can't really put a filter at the source of the water coming in. Do you recommend like a filter at the shower head, a filter at the kitchen tap? And will any type of filter work?
I would send people over to my friend. Her name is Isabel Friend, like we're friends. Friend is her last name. She has everything you could possibly want that she recommends, and I trust her. So I'm not in the world to sell products. My area is crystallography. However, I know she recommends a whole house system called Spring Aqua, and that doesn't use electricity, and she highly recommends it. And she's compared that to Kangen, for example, and what the big differences are between them, and why, and on my website, in my frequently asked questions, I actually direct people to her YouTube link where the question was, have you heard of Kangen water? And I say, go and see Isabel's website link about this, and she explains it, and she's doing a comparison. She has all the different things you could want on her website about filtration, restructuring, all of that. I'm just blessed here that I actually don't need a lot of that stuff because we have beautiful water.
That's amazing. Last two questions I usually like to wrap up these podcasts with, Vita, is one, any recent discoveries that you have implemented to your life?
Um, well, one exciting thing at the moment that I'm working on, because I've always had an interest in archaeology, and so and once a year I do a webinar called Water and the Ancient Mysteries, where we start looking why were all ancient temples and sites built over water sources and aquifers? And so what is the relationship between water and the ancient world? And it's huge. So one of the things that we've been discovering with myself and others is that whether we use an influence like the word information, for example. What I'm talking about right now is a hydroglyph, a repeated pattern that I've seen using the word information. And I see a pattern that looks just like cuneiform, or ancient Sumerian texts, or like an ancient language. But what's interesting is that even when we don't use that influence, people all around the world using all different kinds of waters have seen a very specific pattern that looks like coding in the water. And I'll just hold it up to kind of give people an idea of what I'm talking about. So, for example, this is the kind of coding that I'm talking about. And you see these are different examples. This is one is like, you can't deny that that looks like there is information within it.
And were you saying the word information to the water to have it freeze like this?
What I'm saying is that when I've written the word information and seen that, but even when we've written no words or had no influence, everybody's still seeing that. Maybe sometimes 3 times out of 5. So it's what I think we're actually seeing, and I've been talking to a friend of mine who is an archaeologist. He was the archaeologist actually at the Bosnian pyramid, and amazing friend. And when I showed him that, he says, "Oh my God, that's an ancient language. Like that's a language. That's coding." I'm like, "I know." And so what we're working on right now is feeding AI with all the ancient symbolistic language and what we do understand from it, and then letting AI find repeated patterns in this kind of coding in water. I think what we're seeing is the way that water communicates with itself, a constant updating of information, and that we can literally see it being formed in the ice. And so that to me is something that I'm really excited about because anyone can do it.
Do you think all the water around the world is this one entity? Or do you think water they're all independent. It's like having 8 billion different people around the world, and water's different everywhere.
Well, I think that if you consider, and I'm talking about the water on the surface of Earth, I'm not talking about primary water inside the Earth's mantle, because that is a whole nother topic. And that is a very, there's more water inside the Earth's mantle than all the oceans on the surface of Earth. And it's held within this thing called ringwoodite. It's kind of like a literally held in crystal. However, I'm not talking about that. But if you talk about the water on the surface of Earth, we think about, yes, there's the sea over here and there's sea over here, and then there's the tap water, and then there's the spring water, and there's the mountain water, and they all seem like they're separate, but all of them evaporate, all of them change phases. So all water is in one of its phases. It doesn't stay liquid. It will evaporate, and it will condense. It will become snow, or it will become rain. It'll hit the mountains, or it'll hit the oceans. It will just it's constantly reincarnating for all to see. So the water that is in our glass has found us, right? It's been through the earth, it's been through the trees, it's been through the clouds, it's been through the animals, it's been through, the dinosaurs, it's been through our ancestors, and it's managed to find its way into our glass. And I would suggest that it's not about what the water can do for you. It's more around what is your relationship with water. So we look so much outside of ourselves to help heal ourselves. We're like, if I drink the best water, then I'm going to heal. Well, what is the best water? Do we need to go to the Himalayas and go and get this water and do this and do that to be well? No, you are the welcoming committee. So our saliva also holds information. I've done lots of studies on bodily fluids. You can actually use my freezing method to freeze urine as well. You can see in my new book, it shows you the difference between someone who is highly stressed, what their urine looks like, and then that same person 1 hour after they've done meditation, their urine looks completely different. The urine of someone who's dehydrated looks completely different to urine from someone who is hydrated. So you can start to even use that as a gauge for like where you're at. You can even use urine samples for to test your cycle. Saliva is holding information from the last word or sentence that you spoke. And so when you drink water, your saliva is the first fluid that it touches. So if you have completely ignored it, you don't even think about it, nothing, you don't think anything, it's like an ancestor came to your door, you completely ignored it. And so even a simple thank you is going to make a difference as to the way the water is received. Now, if it is received in a coherent, kind, and loving manner, it is going to be able to share its wisdom with you far easier than if you completely ignore it. The power is with you. The moment we start thinking, what can I do for this water, rather than what can it do for me, the whole energy of that changes. All the power is with you. Always has been, always will be. You're the one that water is going to become you. What environment do you want that water to enter? A loving environment, or just something else? And from my experience of doing all this work for so long, and from working with so many people, those people that give water, just look at that tap water. Look at that tap water, how tap water just structurally changes so rapidly with attention. Just a simple thank you can make all of the difference. Is the way that water, how it will be received, how it will feel, if you will. I know that sounds a little woo-woo, but if I knocked on somebody's door and I'm like, I'm here, and they just ignored me, I'd feel pretty bad. And so I think it's like starting to realize that this is a very intimate thing that we do when we drink water, when we eat food. These things become us. When you eat an apple, you get the energy of an apple. When you eat, anything, a plant, you've got the energy of that plant in you. but we tend not to think about that. When we're drinking water, we have this incredible kind of divine light that is knocking on the door of our body that we can embrace, that can share information with us. Whether that is your filtered tap water, or whether it is, your spring water. I think it's the way in which your relationship grows with what we think water even is, that we've seen that I know somebody who all she could have was filtered tap water. And that filter, I think it was just like a carbon filter. That's the best she could do, right? And she couldn't afford to get anything else. That's where she was at. She started using my crystallographic method every day as a protocol because she was very sick. And so she started to do crystallography every day, and then she would eat the ice every day. And she also used a word. So she wrote a word, came out of her, put the dish of water on top of it, froze it, then would eat the ice. And she did that for 9 months, every day. And when she first started, the water was just,
When you eat the ice, so it comes out of the petri dish, it'll be just like a thin layer. It'll be like a biscuit, right? Okay.
yeah, sometimes you just scoop it in. But because it does start to melt, and that melting stage is a great stage to eat the ice.
Got
And so she started with the word connection for a whole month. She used that word. And then that word started to evolve and change as she started to feel better. And she went from barely being able to walk to being able to go on hikes. And she was doing the internal work. She was doing some movement therapy. But her go-to was eating the crystallography every day. Now, what was fascinating to me was that she said the water started to taste sweeter over time, and the crystallography improved with her health. So it started out, even if it wasn't pretty, she would eat it anyway, no matter what it looked like. And then as her relationship and her journey with water started to grow, the crystallography started to become more and more and more and more beautiful, until by the time she was well and healthy, the crystallography was nearly always the creation glyph.
What was causing her to get more healthy? Was it the eating of the crystals or was it something else? Eating of the ice?
That I believe it was a combination of her eating the ice and doing the internal work, working on herself, and also whatever movement therapy that she was doing. But when you look at the thing that she was putting in her body, the only thing she'd done different was eating the crystallography. We've had a number of people do that now, nearly 200 people over the last 2 years, bringing me information that they started using crystallography for sleeping issues or varied issues, and noticing some result. They don't seem to see a result in the first day. It seems like you have to do it every day for like a week to 10 days, but it works almost like homeopathy in a way, I think.
And it's very specific, right? It's like eating ice that's only frozen for 5 minutes. So it's like a very specific state of water that you're eating. It can't be frozen ice. It can't be just normal water. It's that specific.
It is very specific, and it's water that's informed because it has information in it. So it's different than drinking liquid water with the word love on it, because it has taken on a liquid crystal stage. So it's literally embodied and taken on the formation of that word. It's a very different thing. And it's pushed the solates out. So it's the healthiest state of water to eat. So if you go into how water freezes, it freezes in what I've observed are 3 main stages. The first freeze is the stage we take the water out, where the ice is underneath and the liquid is on the top. I think of that as spirit. The second stage is like an ice sandwich with liquid water in the middle. I think of that as blood. And then a solid, I think of that as body. And so when you are at that first freeze, in a similar way to how you identify fourth phase water, which is actually not H2O, it's H3O2. It has an extra hydrogen and oxygen atom. And this is the stage that we're actually freezing the ice to, where we're starting to see that water is becoming something quite different. And that H3O2 is the kind of water inside of our cells. So our body converts H2O into H3O2. And so it becomes the battery of our cells. And it's a battery because it pushes out the solids. So when you are trying to identify whether there's fourth phase water in water, because it's always within the water. So what you'll do is you'll put your water in a container, then you'll put something called microspheres in it that will show any movement. Then you put a Nafion tube, which is like a little see-through hydrophilic tube, and then you look through a microscope. If you see that there is water self-propelling through the tube round and round and round and round and round and round and round almost endlessly, you have fourth phase water in there. And the reason that that happens is that this fourth phase is where there is no solids. So there's no salts or minerals or whatever in the water. It's pushed all of that out. So this pure state of water is a negative charge. Everything that's pushed out becomes a positive charge. Where you have a negative and a positive, you have a battery. So this is the type of water that is essentially the battery of our cells. Now, what's interesting is that this battery, that negatively charged area, expands quite substantially with infrared light, which is why going into an infrared sauna is so good. Walking barefoot on the ground, you're getting negative ions coming up. Being in front of an actual fire where you're getting infrared light is very, very helpful to expand this special state of water in the cells. So this is really an important piece when you're working with the crystallography to know that the water is at that stage where it's pushed out the solids, which is why it's so crystal clear. If you let that whole water freeze over, it would become quite cloudy with dark little bubbles and bits because that's all the salts and the minerals and what's in the water clouding it over. If you want to get a crystal clear ice cube, you use distilled water, which doesn't have any of those things in it, right? So this ice stage that we'll be eating is at that stage where it's pushed all the solids out and it's the clearest crystal clear liquid crystal of all of the stages that that will eventually go to if you let it to freeze and to overfreeze.
Veda, what's your thoughts on boiling water or using a water distilling machine? Are are those good options for people who have tap water?
I think that I've seen that people often ask, does boiling water destroy the structures? So if you boil water in a kettle or on the oven top, I've actually seen that the structures look quite beautiful afterwards. They don't seem to be destroyed. Water's not afraid of changing state. However, when you fire a microwave oven at it and you do it that way, that it's like there is no structure. I do not recommend using a microwave oven with water whatsoever. I do recommend that if you are going to boil water, you boil it through a kettle or on the stove top, because there are very, very different structures from that.
How about those like plug-in electric kettles that you get from Kmart? Is that okay? It's not on the stove. It's you
That's what I
plug it
mean.
in.
But I mean, all kettles have a plug,
Yeah.
unless you put them on the stove. I've got a plug-in kettle which is on practically all the time. I don't know how many cups of tea a day I have, and so yeah, I've done lots. I think on my Instagram there's a reel where I show this is here I'm boiling the water. Here's what the structures look like. They aren't horrible at all. They've actually still quite pretty. So actually what I've done is I've done the crystallography of the tap water, then put that tap water into a kettle, boiled it, and actually seen it improved.
Oh, very cool. Last question, Vita, that we usually wrap these up with is any personal goals or focus for the next 6 months?
Ooh, yes, I have lots going on in the next 6 months. So my book, The Living Language of Water, just hit. So last weekend. So it's literally just become available. So I'm doing a book tour starting in the UK and Europe. So I'll be also in Dubai. So Dubai, I think the 24th of September, and then I'll be in Amsterdam, and then I'm speaking throughout the UK, and then I'll be ending in Portugal and possibly Spain, and then flying home. So I'll be gone for about a month. I'm in Bali at the end of August with Isabel Friends, like water retreat workshop thing. And then I am going to be in this US in May doing a whole book launch kind of tour. I'm doing another thing for Gaia TV in March next year. I'm going to Egypt in April next year and in November next year. And I'm speaking throughout New Zealand February, and I'm going to be in Australia in February, and I'm giving talks throughout New Zealand this year as well. So just a couple of things, yeah.
That is amazing. Veda, where can people get more of you? How can they get your book that just released? How can they just learn more from you?
A lot of things, well, they're on my website. It's just my name, vedaAustin.com. I post daily on Instagram as well, which is Veda Austin _water. And I also share lots of other people's work. So if you get something really interesting, I recommend you send it to me, because I think that in sharing other people's work proves that it isn't just me that gets really interesting results, and that it's not just my relationship with water that's unique. I think that's really, really important for me, which is why in the book I have a whole chapter dedicated to other people's work. Just to show, yes, there's people, including children, all the way around the world seeing really amazing things in water. And those are the main, I also on Facebook as well, I post from Instagram over there. So those are my main platforms. People can get the book from my website, from links on my website. I'm not supporting Amazon. So rather than it being just go to Amazon, actually, if you go to my website, you'll see I've had to employ 3 different printers: a printer in New Zealand, a printer in America, and a printer in the UK, because I didn't want to skimp on quality, but I didn't want people have to pay hundreds of dollars for shipping from New Zealand, for example. So there's links to where is closest to you. So if you are in Europe, you'd click the UK one. If you're in Canada, you'd click the US one. And New Zealand and Australia only send to New Zealand and Australia right now, because it's just where we're at. But lots of people have already got their books now, so I'm happy and relieved to see that they're all really happy, and that the way it's been shipped has been really, really good. So it's been a real process. It's been a real process, but when I started looking at it, I just saw that the quality wasn't good enough with Amazon, and they take so much from the actual author, and I like to just do things my own way. Maybe I'm a control freak, I don't know, I hope not, but I just really like things done so I can feel proud to say, yes, this is my work.
I really like the album cover. I know you briefly showed it up, but the album cover looked really cool. And it's like a nice A4 looking sort of format, not the traditional.
It's
Yeah,
it's
beautiful
a big,
artwork.
it's a big book.
Oh, it's
This
colored.
It is, yeah. There's like 1,500 color
Wow.
photos in it. It's over 300 pages. It's like got all my studies. It's got a huge music section. So there is a man called Ram Das who sang a song called Water Poem, and this is the way that water responded to it. And this is the picture, the design of what we call the star fern hexagon that I've talked about, where it looks like a star with ferns off each leg in the shape of a hexagon. And so I'm an artist, so I like things to look a certain way. So, we've included 1,500 photos of water responding in all different kinds of ways. So, yeah, I'm really proud of it. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today, Veda. I learned so much. It was such a fun conversation. If I didn't have this meeting right after, I'd probably do a 3-hour podcast with you. Like I had so many questions I've written down that we couldn't answer. But thank you so much for your time. I love how passionate you are. Congratulations on all the success. You've been doing this for so long. I can just tell that you've been just taking small steps every single day, every single year for the last decade more. And everything that's coming your way is sort of truly deserved. And I can just see how passionate you are about water, which is so cool. Who could have expected that you could, have a whole career around just water? So
Yeah.
very cool.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Guys, if you made it this far, hope you guys got some value from today's episode, and I'll see you guys next week. Yeah, peace. Thank you so much for your time. I had so much fun. It was very insightful. I'm definitely gonna keep saying thank you as I drink my water. I'm definitely gonna incorporate that. And I wrote down the crystallography activity. So like if friends want to do something, I might sort of give that. It'll be like a cool afternoon activity.
It's really fun. It's a little addictive. That's the only thing I'll say. All right. Well, I also have to go. So it was so nice to meet you. Thank you so
Have
much.
a beautiful week. Have a beautiful
See you
upcoming
later.
weekend. Bye.